So in this video, I thought we'd revisit the winter sowing method and basically how to do it for beginners kind of video. I mean, it's a really simple technique that's just really effective if you're tight on space, if you don't know where you're going to put your plants yet, but you want to get a great start on growing them. If you want a succession sow, so you want some plants early. If you don't have a lot of time, because you can sow these bottles and pretty much forget about them until they start to germinate. And just really, it's a great method if you are really short of space and time. And also, if you're not quite sure what you're doing. And so all you need basically is a bottle. It can be a milk bottle. It can be any kind of bottle that allows light in, basically, and that you can puncture to have drainage and air holes. So any kind of bottle will do. Then you need a tub of soil. Obviously, you can do this outside, but it's snowing here, so I did do it inside. You need something for sealing the bottle because you're going to cut the bottle open. So you need some sellotape or masking tape for sealing it, some scissors or a craft knife for cutting the bottle, and obviously some labels so you know what you're growing. If you're anything like me, you're going to grow probably too many things and you're going to forget what they are. I also use a spoon for stirring because you do need to moisten this soil, and for obviously putting it in the pot. I have eczema on my hands, so I don't really want the soil in my hands, in any open source. But you can use gloves as well, or you can just use your bare hands. Some people don't mind. I didn't used to mind, but now that I've got eczema, I prefer to protect my hands from the soil. Okay, so let's talk about the soil a bit. I mix this up outside, and it's just basically ordinary compost. Any compost will do that you already have, that you've either made yourself or that you've bought. Obviously, it must be sieved. If it's in clumps, or it's all stuck together, then you need to sieve it, because the roots of these seedlings are going to be so fine that they need a good chance to get through the soil. And to help aerate and break those soil particles up and stop them sticking together and becoming too hard, then we're going to use quite a bit of sand. I would say probably about 40 to 60%. So 40% sand, 60% compost. This is for seed starting, so you wouldn't want to necessarily use this formula for transplanting your seeds once they've grown. But the reason for the sand, having quite a lot of sand, is so that it keeps those particles separate, and therefore they don't need a lot of nutrients. So the sand, having a lot of sand, isn't going to harm the plant. But what it's going to do is it's going to keep the particles all separate so that it can get those tiny little baby roots through the soil. Okay, and as you can see, it gives it a very much different consistency and texture when you add that sand to it. You can, of course, buy seed starting compost, but really it's much the same principle. They've just added something to help keep the soil open for the roots, and also to prevent over nutrients. It can sort of burn the roots if you have too many nutrients. And so this is an appropriate amount of nutrient and an appropriate amount of sand to keep the soil particles open. This is also wet, I should have said. My compost was already wet, but what you do need to do is you need to dampen it down and get every single particle moist, but you don't want it soaking wet. When you put it in your hands, it should go into a ball and stay in a ball, but without sort of water flowing out of it when you squeeze it. It should just be wet, but not a river. So there we go. So this is all super moist, and you can see the colour of it and the texture now. It's very fine, so it's perfect for little baby seedlings. So I'm going to sow some poppies in this demonstration. There are obviously many different types of plants that are suitable for growing this way, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, let's just have a look at these poppy seeds. They're tiny. I have loads of them because I did my first ever sowing of poppy seeds in the winter sowing method, and I have pretty much supplied myself with seeds ever since from the flowers that grew from that very first sowing. So I have never bought poppy seeds since. I have tons of poppy seeds. All right, so then you need to get the bottle, and then you need to obviously cut off the label, and we don't need the lid either. So we remove the lid to allow the airflow and the elements. We still want the rain to tinkle through and we want the seeds to basically be as though they're outside, but just a month further ahead of time, because they're protected from this bottle. And then we need to cut sort of about, I do about halfway to 3/4 of the way up. And you need to balance how much soil you're going to need. I used to do it a little bit too shallow, so now I add a bit more soil, a bit more, it's a bit more deep, because if the spring doesn't come soon, if you have a bad spring, for instance, those plants are going to be in there longer. And so they will need a little bit more soil and nutrients as they grow, because it might be a longer time before you can get them out. They're going to get bigger, and therefore they just need that bit more soil and space. So you're going to have to balance it depending on your climate. Obviously, if you have a really mild climate and you're going to get them out quite soon, then don't waste too much soil in the bottom. But I tend to go about sort of 6 inches, 5 or 6 inches deep. And that way I've got room. If I can't get them out, if we have a poor spring, they will be happy. They will have enough nutrients and enough moisture and enough space to continue growing in. So I think actually I said 5 to 6 inches, but probably 4 to 5 is more accurate for the poppies anyway. As you saw in the previous clip, they got quite lush inside the bottle before I managed to plant them out. So, you have to bear that in mind. You have to give them enough soil and enough room. So that's the other thing, poppies, because the seeds are so tiny, you have to be careful not to overseed them. All right, so you can see I have the bottle semi-filled now, almost up to the midway point that I've cut. That will give me easy access when I need to get them out. And by the way, when you get them out, you're better off cutting them out, actually. Depending on how mature they are, you're better off actually just cutting the bottle open and getting your seeds out that way. That way you minimally damage the roots when you come to transplant them. But here we are. So we get the poppy seeds and just basically sprinkle them on top. And then add a little covering of soil. Now, some seeds do like light to germinate, so you will need to check that and keep them uncovered if that's the case. I like to put a bit of soil over my poppies because it holds them in place. If the wind, say, knocks the bottle over, I don't want the seeds sort of sprawling along the bottle. I want them to stay in contact with the soil. Sometimes that happens, so make sure you put your bottle in a sheltered spot when you finally put it outside. All right, next thing I'm going to do is label it, because I will probably plant too many and I will lose track of what I've done. So I'm going to use a Sharpie, which is of course waterproof, and just a wooden kind of lollipop craft stick thing. I split them in half, so I can use just half of this, so I can use this lollipop stick twice. And then I put it inside the bottle facing outwards, so I can read it from the outside looking in at the bottle, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense. Then we're going to obviously seal the bottle with the sellotape or masking tape. I like sellotape because it keeps it nice and clear, and also sellotape has a way of kind of fusing to the bottle, so it's kind of counterintuitive because you think the sellotape would come off in the rain, but actually it's pretty solid. It does a pretty good job of sealing up the bottle. And after that, of course, you just put the bottles outside in a sunny spot, huddle them together so they kind of create their own sort of thermal mass. And their own little microclimate. If you can put them in a sheltered spot by a wall, so much the better. What you're just trying to do is create a milder spring to bring these plants on earlier, and also with minimal effort. So what I wouldn't grow this way is a biennial, because they're sown in the summer anyway, they overwinter and they flower the following year. So when you're looking at your packets, anything that's a biennial, it's really not worth it, because you're just wasting space and time on that when you can just grow it outside anyway. Similar as sunflower, I wouldn't grow this way. I'd just wait until the season heats up. But things like hardy annuals are really good, especially if you didn't start them before winter. So hardy annuals, typically you would start in the autumn. You can start in the autumn rather. They will overwinter and then take off again in the spring. If you've missed the autumn sowing, you can definitely get a head start by sowing them in the winter sowing method. Half hardy annuals also, but you might want to delay those because they're a little bit more tender. So maybe winter sow those in February because they cannot tolerate a hard frost. And a hard frost, of course, could still, affect your bottle. I've had really good success with bringing early flowers, Nigella, things like Saponaria. Obviously, I've had great results with my poppies, snapdragons. Just creating when I didn't know what I was doing with snapdragons, I just used to chuck a load in the winter sowing method, and then whatever succeeded. This coreopsis here was very successful. I did all my Shasta daisies this way. Now, it is obviously a great way of creating a microclimate, but it's also a great way of just containing your plants. So in my case, I am obviously turning over I thought I finished landscaping my garden. I hadn't. I'm now turned it over again. And I don't obviously want to be sowing seeds in borders that I'm constantly tinkering with and moving and turning over. So it's a really nice way of growing seeds, having seeds growing ready for planting. But you can still get on with all your winter tasks, whether that be digging your borders, refreshing your soil, moving plants, whatever, without the worry of damaging seeds that you've sown or remembering where you put them. You can just confine them in these bottles, put them in a corner. They don't even have to be in sight. You can put them on the drive if you like, out of sight, out of mind, until you're ready to plant them. The only thing I will just say is once the green comes through, once the shoots come through, just make sure they don't dry out. You may need to splash them with a watering can, depending on how dry your spring is. But other than that, they don't really need any care. If they start to go a bit yellow, they may need transplanting or topping up or freshening up with some soil until you're ready to plant them out. They just need more nutrients at this point. So just a few things to think about when you're thinking about the aftercare. But once you've planted them out, put them out, forget them until they start to show green and the spring starts to, warm up. And then you can think about taking a bit more care of them, transplanting them, etc. Anyway, that's it. It's an absolute foolproof method. I think there's a couple of things I haven't succeeded in growing this way, but that was mainly down to my soil. I didn't have the right soil. My soil was too hard, and I allowed it to dry out. But if you have the good soil with the good sand, good drainage, and you don't allow it to dry out, then you're going to have great success, I think. Let me know how you get on. And if you've got this far watching this video, thank you for watching. Don't forget to check out my website and also my other videos. And I'll see you again in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.